Welcome to another episode of Logistics with Purpose. My name's Enrique Alvarez, and today I have a really interesting human being. He has done amazing things and was honored with the Ethical Corporation's 2019 Business Leader of the Year. He has a lot of things to share. He goes sometimes by Don Pablo, but we'll better known here in the U.S. by Paul Rice, founder and CEO at Fairtrade USA. Hey, Paul, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
This is great. I'm excited to have you. You and I met at the Conscious Capitalism event a couple years ago, and we have had the opportunity to hang out for 2 years in a row. Hopefully, we can make that 3 and 4 and 5 every time that. I mean, you have so much to offer, and it's always very interesting. But before we dive into your amazing career and changing people's lives, just tell us a little bit more about you. Who is Paul?
We need a bottle of Nicaraguan Flor de Caña rum to.
I would take you on that offer. Next time we see each other, we'll go through the rum route. But just briefly, I mean, where did you grow up? Tell us a little bit about your childhood.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Texas, actually. Born in Dallas, grew up in Austin, went back to Dallas for high school. As a high school student, started to get interested in issues of social justice and my family traveled a lot, especially to Mexico. So I grew up kind of seeing the reality of other countries from a very early age. And so I went off to college, went to Connecticut for college and ended up studying economics and political science and got very interested in international development and global poverty and how to fix it. And that became my passion from, age 18. And had a chance to go to Nicaragua in 1982 for the first time to study the land reform and the cooperative movement there, and fell in love with the place. And
it must have been an amazing experience. And I'll jump back a little bit to your earlier days before we jump into Nicaragua. But before we started recording, you mentioned that. You mentioned that you were in Mexico before we started recording. You mentioned that you just came back from Mexico, an amazing, beautiful beach town that I didn't know about. What was the name of it? Just so we can have it.
Sayulita, Mexico.
Sayulita, Mexico. If anyone is listening to this, Sayulita, Mexico, Paul recommends.
Great place. It's just an hour north of Puerto Vallarta, and great whale watching, surfing, all the things.
Certified by Don Pablo.
Yeah, exactly.
So going back, so tell us a little bit, like one story or two of your early years, something that kind of shaped who you are. I mean, you told us a little bit about your upbringing and that you traveled a lot and your passion for changing the world, but any kind of story that kind of started showing you the man that you would later become?
Sure. Yeah, my growing up years were hard. My father left our family when I was a year old and never returned. And so my mom, at the age of 37, found herself with 3 kids, no education, no job, no money, and no man, and decided that she was going to never depend on someone else for her livelihood again. She got a job. She enrolled in college, got her bachelor's, master's, and PhD over the next 10 years while raising me and my 2 sisters. And so I've always felt like I had a front row seat on the original Wonder Woman show. My mom was my only parent, and she was amazing. And I feel so blessed to have had her as a role model, a woman that worked incredibly hard, that had progressive values, in the 60s and 70s around things like race and gender and the war in Vietnam and all of those things. And so I was imprinted with a very progressive mindset from an early age. And, because we were poor, I started working when I was 11, first shining shoes, then mowing lawns. But I had I had an entrepreneurial streak. And so a couple of years into lawn mowing, I figured out a way to penetrate the higher end neighborhoods and get paid much for the same amount of work. And then I hired some other boys my age and, had hired hands basically. And by the time I was 16, I had saved up enough to buy a house. And
with this landscaping, started like a lawn mowing, but guessing it became much larger down the road.
Yeah, I mean, it was mostly lawn mowing, man. It was,
That
it
is awesome.
was hard work, but I saved. And at 16, I bought a house. My mother co-signed because I was a minor, and I became a landlord at 16. And I flipped that a few years later, and was able to pay for the rest of my education at Yale with the profits that I made on that. So I,
Wow.
from an early age, I learned the value of hard work, but I also exercised this entrepreneurial energy that was already bubbling up in me from an early age, and which today in my current role as a social entrepreneur and leader of the fair trade movement, I find that my entrepreneurial energy is still very much engaged on a regular basis, and we can talk more about that in a minute.
No, but that's fantastic. And thank you very much for sharing. I mean, first and foremost, what's your mom's name? Amazing woman.
Ruth Rice.
Ruth Rice.
Ruth
Wow.
Rice. Here's my mama.
Sounds unbelievable. I think that what she accomplished under such circumstances, it's just something not everyone can pull off, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's
She
really
was
good. And
amazing.
you're the older
I'm the
of the three?
youngest. I'm the baby.
So you're the baby. So you had three moms basically by
Yeah,
then.
exactly. Yeah, and yeah, my mama passed away 3 years ago at the age of 95.
Wow, I'm
Uh,
sorry to
with
hear
me and
that.
with me and my sisters at her bedside at home. So she had an amazing life, and she had a great death. And I think of her every day, and I've got her picture looking at me right here on my desk.
Well, I'm pretty sure she must be incredibly proud of you, and she sounds like a terrific mom. Do you remember something kind of when you were younger, when you were at 11, kind of working your first job? Anything that she probably told you, something that you have probably extracted a lot of energy to keep up, or
You know, she worked very hard and showed me by example
example?
the value of hard work and the value of saving and eventually the value of investing. I think I learned all of those things from her in those very young years, and it was not by talking, but mostly by doing. She was she modeled she modeled that behavior for me, and obviously she was very formative in my life.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that story. Again, congratulations. Sounds like you had an amazing mom.
Thank you.
You received an MBA at Yale Economics and Political Science. So how did
The
that
MBA
happen?
was later. The MBA was later. My BA, my bachelor's degree was at Yale. Yeah, and I focused on economics and political science. And frankly, when I finished my 4 years at Yale, I was certain I would never go back to school for a master's degree. The MBA is later in the story. That was definitely a surprise for myself as well.
Moving on to your career a little bit, tell us a little bit more. I know that you started this lawn mowing business very early on. What came next after the lawn mowing, the flipping of the house?
After college, like I said, I'd been in Nicaragua for a 3 month stint in between my junior and senior years in college, and
Was it
that's
like a
when I
mission trip, or what was
no
that thing?
no I was doing research. I was researching the land reform and food
Oh
policy,
wow.
and I lived on a co-op in the countryside and did a lot of oral histories with farm workers who had received land uh, during the land reform program, and it formed a cooperative. And so I was looking at um, uh, productivity, land and labor productivity on cooperatives versus non-cooperative farms. So there was an academic. This was for my senior thesis at Yale. There was an academic,
Right.
reason to be there, but really I was just there because there was a revolution going on. And I was very excited about that and wanted to learn. And I fell in love with Nicaragua. And so a couple of months after graduation in 1983, I bought a one-way ticket to Nicaragua and I went back.
Wow.
And I ended up staying for 11 years, and it became the kind of the first chapter of my career. I spent that time way up in the mountains in northern Nicaragua in a region called the Segovias, which is a coffee producing region. Some of the best coffee in the world is grown up there. And I had a chance to work on a lot of different uh, development projects, right? International development projects that were designed by very well-intentioned, smart people, in USAID and different development agencies and non-governmental organizations around the world. Usually involve millions of dollars in development aid to support these projects. And I worked on a lot of these projects for a number of years. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, I got to work with farmers, wearing blue jeans and cowboy boots and riding up into the hills on horses and motorcycles and visiting with farmers, helping to organize farmers, helping to teach, basic management skills
Right.
and budgeting and finance skills to farmers there. And I met my wife, my wife to be, a beautiful Nicaraguan woman who was also very involved in the social movement there, and Marisol, and we had our son Emiliano there in Nicaragua as well. And it was a great life. And at the same time, over time, I began to feel increasingly disappointed and even discouraged with this traditional model of aid.
Right.
This
Right.
top-down model where well-intentioned governments and agencies send millions of dollars to help alleviate poverty through grassroots economic development, and yet more often than not, in my personal experience anyway, we didn't really help farmers develop their own capacity to solve their own problems. I think more often than not, we actually created dependency on foreign aid.
Is that I'm guessing a little bit the reason why you started your first venture, Prodecop Coffee Export Cooperative? Did
It
I
is.
pronounce that? Is it Prodecoup,
Yeah.
Prodecop, depending on Spanish, English?
Yeah. So I was so discouraged with that model of development aid that I started looking around at other approaches, and kind of by accident, in 1990, I heard from a friend about the fair trade movement. And fair trade at that time was big in Europe. There wasn't really much happening in the United States. A couple of companies, Equal Exchange and some others, but there was no real fair trade movement in the US the way there was in Europe. And it was interesting that, the fair trade people had a slogan: trade, not aid. Trade,
Which
not
which speaks exactly to your earlier point, right?
exactly.
All right,
And
show us, don't like buy
their
from us, don't give
is
us money.
people don't need our charity. They
Yeah,
just need us to pay them a fair price, for all their hard work and for the harvest that they produce. And so that was a very compelling idea to me. I've never met a farmer that wants our charity. Farmers just want
right,
a fair return.
right.
So, long story short, I ended up organizing Nicaragua's very first fair trade cooperative with 20 coffee farmers. And that first year, we filled one container of coffee with
Wow.
one container with coffee, and we shipped it to a fair trade buyer who paid us $1 a pound after cost, $1 a pound for our farmers at a time when the local market price was 10 cents a pound.
Wow. It makes
So
such
we
a huge
literally,
difference. Plus, there's so much margin in the, especially coffee supply chain, that it's totally worth it, right?
yeah, I mean, we were literally getting our farmers 10 times more than what their neighbors were getting. And just to like break this down, I was working with very, very, very small, poor farmers, people with 1 acre, maybe 2 acres of land. The average harvest volume was 2,000 pounds of coffee a year. So 1 ton, 2,000 pounds. So if they got 10 cents a pound, their
Wow.
neighbor getting 10 cents a pound, that was $200 total cash income for
For
the
the
year.
year.
Not
Wow.
even $1 a day, not even $1 a day. And our farmers that year got $1 a pound. So on average, they were getting $2,000. Most of them
Wow.
had never seen that much money ever in their lives. And so, I was a very popular guy that first season. And I got a new nickname that year. People started calling me Pablo Un Dólar,
Pablo Un
one,
Dólar. I like
$1
that.
Paul, because that was my mantra: join the co-op and we can pay you $1 a pound. And that led to over the next 4 years that I led the co-op, that led to us organizing 3,000
Wow.
families. We went from 20 families to 3,000 families all over northern Nicaragua, who brought their coffee together. We milled it, we controlled the quality, and we exported it direct, jumping over the middlemen. And by exporting direct to fair trade buyers, we also went
Was
organic.
that in
We had
Europe, I imagine, right? The first container was going to Europe since Europe had already the
Europe.
movement.
Yeah,
The
that was
US did not have this movement yet, right?
exactly. So, we were able to develop a multi-million-dollar coffee
Wow.
business that was delivering extraordinary income back to our families, right? I mean, our families were getting so much more money by virtue of this direct form of trade and by virtue of the fair trade premiums that we were getting, that they were able to stay on the land first and foremost and not have to
Wow.
immigrate. They were able to feed their families 3 times a day because sometimes poor families skip meals because they have no choice. We dug wells in communities for the first time and brought clean drinking water to the families, which immediately improved health. We created a scholarship program so that kids could go on to high school and eventually on to college. We started an organic certification program, and so many of our farmers became sustainable farmers and organic certified. We reforested hillsides that had been deforested by transnational lumber companies a generation earlier. In short, we did all of this really cool stuff. And here's the punchline: thanks to nobody's charity,
Right. No,
right?
it was just like a fair price for what they were doing.
Exactly.
And
Thanks
yeah,
to a fair return through a more direct, connected supply chain and through the fair trade movement. And so, the thing that excited me the most was how proud people were. The hope and the pride and the dignity and the self confidence of people who previously had seen themselves as victims of globalization, and through this journey became co-owners of a
right.
multi-million-dollar coffee export company that was delivering extraordinary value and hope for the future.
Wow. I mean, must have been incredible not only to be the catalyst of something so amazing, but then just to be there to witness it. Because you mentioned that you started uh, in uh, in 90, in the early 90s, and then you did this for how long? Like 10 years. And at
For
what
you.
point, so what point did you start Fair Trade USA?
Well, let me get to that.
Yes.
So I led this co-op for the last 4 years that I was in Nicaragua, from 90 to 94.
Wow.
And honestly, this experience completely changed my life and completely changed how I viewed the market and the world of business in the effort to improve the lives of poor people around the world. Before this experience, I really didn't think the market had much to offer. In fact, I thought business, because it's profit oriented, was more the problem than the solution to the plight of poor coffee farmers. What I learned through this experience was that markets and business can actually be quite possibly the most powerful lever for change and the
Right.
most powerful tool for enabling the world's poor on a journey out of progress. And I witnessed it. I was a part of it. It wasn't theoretical. It was very practical. And so, I think that was when I started to see myself as a conscious capitalist and as someone who had found a way to kind of harness the power of the market for social and environmental good. And so at that point, 11 years in Nicaragua, Nicaraguan wife, Nicaraguan son, I was Pablo. I didn't think I was ever going to come back to the US. But at that point, I had an epiphany. And the epiphany was I had a calling to see if I could take the fair trade movement from Europe and bring it to the US,
Right.
to see if I could adapt that model, which worked for the European market and the European consumer. No one had really tried to adapt it at scale to the US. So I came back to do that. And, you mentioned my MBA earlier. When I first came back, I felt like I needed to learn the tools of business.
Right.
I'd been running an export company in Nicaragua, so I'd kind of learned doing, but I didn't feel like my depth of knowledge was enough to be able to build a fair trade movement in the U.S. So I came back to California. I got an MBA at UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business.
Nice.
It was an amazing ride. It really felt like coming home, coming to Berkeley, because there was a very strong entrepreneurship program here. Not so much social entrepreneurship, but remember, this was like 2004 to 2006, so the internet was taking off. A lot of my classmates were starting tech ventures, and so there was just an environment of creativity and risk taking and exploration around entrepreneurial endeavor that I thrived on. And in fact, I wrote the business plan for Fair Trade USA in my second year MBA entrepreneurship class, and then launched Fair Trade USA in 1998. And
So for people that might not know exactly what Fair Trade USA is, could you just tell us a little bit more about the actual organization and how it works and what you guys are set up to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So Fair Trade USA is kind of the hub of the U.S. fair trade movement. We are a nonprofit organization, relatively small, 180 employees, $25 million in revenue. But I like to think of us as the kind of center of an hourglass, the skinny part of an hourglass. So above us, the market, we work with 1,500 major corporations, from Whole Foods to Walmart, Safeway, Costco, all the major companies, and then lots of brands as well. We have 66% consumer awareness of our Fair Trade Certified seal.
Wow.
You've probably seen our seal, Fair Trade Certified, on.
I love that you have all these prompts, by the way, that you're showing. You're the only one that has done that.
Of course I have props, bro.
Amazing. That's the way to go.
We last year we were able to catalyze an $11 billion market, $11 billion in product sales here in the U.S. with our label on it. And so that's kind of the top of the hourglass. And then the other side of the hourglass are all the farmers that we work with around the world. Of course, I started in Nicaragua, but today we're in 51 countries in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America. We work in coffee, we work in tea and sugar and chocolate and fresh fruits and vegetables. We work in seafood and dairy, and now apparel and home goods and other factory-made goods. Today we're working with over a million, just over a million farmers and workers in 51 countries. So what do we do concretely? What is Fair Trade USA? Our main role is to define fair trade, right? To define the fair trade standard. Fair trade's a philosophy, it's a movement, but also a standard, like the organic standard. So we have a checklist of 300 compliance criteria that address labor issues on the farm or in the factory, that address social issues, that address environmental issues. So all the stuff that you would imagine, right? Like living wage and no child labor and no slave labor and worker safety and health and environmental impact, all those things are in the fair trade standard. And our farms and factories and fisheries get audited every year. And if they pass the audit, then they're certified and are eligible to sell with the fair trade label on their package. And on the other side of the market, the companies we work with, all these brands and retailers, agree to pay more money. So that's the secret sauce of fair trade.
And you would also open your network to them. So if a farmer somewhere gets certified, you will also funnel him through to the companies that you're already working with you, which I'm guessing it's a really, really win-win for everyone.
Exactly. Matchmaking supply and demand is a key part of what we do. Absolutely. But it's interesting because there's so many approaches to social auditing and their codes of conduct, and most of the efforts out there are essentially asking suppliers to be more responsible, to be more sustainable, but the costs are your problem. The costs are the supplier's problem. Like, most companies don't say, supplier, if you produce in a more responsible way, if you pay your workers a living wage, we, the buyer, will pay you more money. We'll
Right.
reward you for that. Fair trade model does exactly that. And that's what makes us unique. Our message to suppliers, to farm owners, factory owners is if you meet the fair trade standard, the market will pay you more. And we call that the fair trade premium. And last year we delivered $100 million in fair trade premiums back to
Wow.
all the farms and factories. And cumulatively, we've generated over $1 billion now in fair trade premiums back to the communities that we work with over the last now 24 years that we've been in business.
Do
So
you,
it's a really, just to finish the idea,
no, please.
it's a really different idea than top-down charity,
Right.
right? Our approach to improving the lives of farmers and workers and to protecting the environment and reducing the climate impact is by enlisting companies and consumers to reward those responsible suppliers. And so the end result is better livelihoods for hardworking families all around the world. And for us as consumers, we get to feel good knowing that, one package of coffee at a time, here's Allegro Fair Trade
I
Coffee
love that.
on it. One package of coffee at a time, we're changing the world.
Well, and on top of that, it sounds to me that it's also profitable and for companies that are doing this because there's a willingness to pay what you call the fair trade premium already. So all of a sudden you'll be able to not only attract better employees, you'll be able to attract better customers. You'll become like a higher end brand. You'll actually, so it's not that they're just, again, paying more for the sake of paying more. I'm pretty sure that they see it by now that paying more for this kinds of things will in return yield much larger profit for them as well.
Well, I'm really glad you raised that because that speaks to our theory of change.
Right.
My message to to Patagonia or to PepsiCo or to Whole Foods or to Walmart, my message isn't take a profit hit in order to help your farmers and your workers. That's not my message. My message is anchored in a theory that Michael Porter at Harvard described as shared value. And the idea of shared value is that we go beyond the fixed pie mentality where we're just fighting over the size of our slice.
Right.
To an expansive mentality where new value is created through a different approach to business. And that new value is shared by the stakeholders in the model. And so my hypothesis at Fair Trade USA is that if companies do fair trade, it'll be good for business. And so the farmers win, but business also wins as well. And so you just spoke to a couple of the attributes. For one, it gives the brand or the retailer a brand halo. It gives them a message to tell the consumer. And, overwhelmingly, consumers say they want more responsible and sustainable products, especially Gen Z and millennial consumers. So that's number one, right? That's, if you will, benefit number one for the business community of fair trade. Number two, and your audience will really appreciate this, supply chain resilience. Everyone's worried about supply chains these days. Well, if you're Starbucks or Pete's, you need to ensure a reliable supply of high quality beans. Fair trade helps you do that because guess what? When you pay the farmers a premium, they give you their best beans. They prioritize you in their deliveries. If they ever stock out, you're not going to be the one to suffer. I mean, it's just logical. There's a degree of loyalty in the fair trade transaction that makes supply chains more resilient and more reliable. We're doing a pilot with Walmart right now on fair trade tomatoes. And it's really interesting because when we designed the pilot, and by the way, a pilot for Walmart means Walmart today is the largest seller of fair trade tomatoes in the world.
that is incredible, by the way. Congratulations.
But we're doing a pilot with Walmart on tomatoes, and when we started it, they wanted to design a dashboard of KPIs that we would be tracking, and of course, it was looking at the benefits to the farmers from the fair trade premium and all of those things. But then they wanted to put in some other things. They wanted to put in productivity. Like, is a fair trade farm more productive than a non-fair trade farm? They wanted to put in worker retention.
Wow.
Is a fair trade farm able to retain their workforce in higher numbers than non-fair trade farms? And at one point in this early conversation, I said to them, why do you care? I mean, why do you care about productivity and worker retention? You don't own the farm,
Right.
right? You're buying from a supplier who's buying from the farm. If the farm loses its workforce and can't deliver, your supplier will find another farm to buy from. Why do you care? And it was really interesting. I learned so much that day. Walmart said, we need a reliable, secure, resilient supply chain, to meet the growing demand that we project in the future. So we care about the farms, we care about productivity, we care about worker retention and all of these other attributes because we want to identify farms that will work for us into the future. We want to support them and we want to partner with them for the long term. And so that means caring about the things that they care about. And that blew me away. Okay, so I'm going to share a couple of numbers with you.
Well, please do.
From this pilot, because, we're 2 years in now. And so.
And it was only tomatoes, right? Or there's other things that are included? Well, this was just for the tomato farms.
No, we do more with Walmart.
Right.
Walmart does a lot of fair trade coffee, for
right.
example. We do some other things with Walmart, but this was our first venture into fresh produce with Walmart.
Okay.
And, obviously it gives us a template in the future to look at, bananas and bell peppers and avocados and all the things. Okay. So we're 2 years into the pilot and we're seeing worker retention rates at 87% on these farms versus 60% industry average. And what does that mean, worker retention? It means, at the end of the harvest, people go home, and then do they come back? And the reason why this is so important, number one, there are labor shortages throughout U.S. agriculture and Mexican agriculture, which is where the farms are located, both in the U.S. and Mexico. So if a farm owner doesn't get all the workers back the next season, it means their recruitment costs go up. They have to look for labor. It means their training costs go up. They have to train the workers. And typically productivity is not as high because those workers are just learning the business. And so what we're finding is that, and it just makes sense, these workers are getting the fair trade premium. They're getting benefits.
Right. Why would they leave if they're treating them fairly and they feel valued? And
so the worker retention rates are so much higher and the productivity is higher. And so, that is a strong benefit both for the farm owners and then in Walmart's eyes, okay, these are stronger suppliers. This is a more resilient supply chain. So we're so excited about this pilot because Walmart has just told us, it's no longer a pilot, it's a program. And
that's great.
Explore now how to ramp it up.
Congratulations.
So, thank you. That's another attribute, when I think about building a shared value model that not only helps farmers, workers, and the environment, but also helps the business world. We talked about sales, we talked about supply chain resilience, and then, the reputational piece, because there are no more secrets in the global supply chain. If a factory collapses, workers are crushed, or if child labor is exposed on farms, sooner or later, because every farmer and worker in the world has one of these, right? And so sooner or later, that will be exposed and it will damage the reputation of the brand or the retailer that's buying. And it doesn't matter if you're directly responsible, the public will hold you responsible.
Especially now, because you mentioned like new generations. And I think this has clearly been changing over time. And you have children, I have children as well. For my children in particular, they're not going to see this as a nice thing to do. I argued the other day that they don't see this as premiums. It's not the fair trade premium. It's not the sustainability premium. For them, this is the only product that I have. They're starting to not even see or entertain products that are, even though in the same category, they are not fair trade, sustainable, good companies, responsible, purpose driven.
Exactly. No, it's so true. It's so true. Reputation matters. I'm writing a book now, by the way.
Go ahead. Do you have a title yet?
Trade. I figure, I've been in this movement now for 35 years. I've earned the right to write a book about it. And one of the chapters in the book is reputation matters. And it's just about how, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, companies could get away with not really paying attention to the conditions in their supply chain. But today, because there's more transparency,
you can't hide, right?
You can't hide from what's going on, and it will affect your reputation if, bad stuff becomes public. And so more and more, I mean, I think a lot of companies are joining kind of the conscious capitalism
Right.
movement
Right.
and are embracing sustainability and social responsibility for good reason, for values. But other companies, um, for better for worse, they're also embracing better practices because they don't want to be stung by a scandal, by a child labor scandal in their supply chain. So,
No, definitely. It's a
regardless of the
strategic,
motivation, things are getting better.
yeah, it's a strategic competitive advantage, as you mentioned, with a lot of upside for companies that apply this principle. So you're absolutely right. I think it has come from being nice or social about something, and it's become like a key competitive driver that's going to fuel your profits.
Yeah.
So Fair Trade USA, amazing story, 35 years in the making and growing fast. Two things. So you have more now than 30 product categories that you certify, correct?
Yeah.
How do you think about, because you have everything from coffee to tomatoes to, I mean, how are you thinking about adding the new categories? Is there like a strategy, a process behind that?
Yeah, there is, and primarily it's market driven. So our latest uh, our latest new categories are cosmetics and footwear. And it wasn't because we woke up one day and said, "Hey, the workers in the
Right.
cosmetic industry are exploited and they need our help." Rather, it was a market leader, ELF, that is a multi-billion-dollar brand, and they sell in Target and Walmart, and it's kind of um, um, an accessible price point product, especially for young women. And so it's a great match for us in terms of the audience that we want to reach. It's not a super elite brand. It's
Right.
targeting a younger consumer. And so we were excited when they came to us and said, "We see what you're doing in apparel and home goods with Patagonia and J. Crew and Gap and Pottery Barn. Can you take that model and adapt it to the world of cosmetics?" And so, we did the research. We developed the module, an extra module in the standard for cosmetics, and we launched with Elf. I think we certified their factories last year, and we launched with them last month. So actually, you know, the the rollout is underway, and that's just hugely exciting to me because I think that's going to create a ripple
Right.
effect where other cosmetics brands are going to look at this lighthouse brand that has gone first, uh, and um, and then want to emulate it. And so that's very much a part of our um, uh, growth strategy, is to identify the right brands to partner with first, and then to create a dynamic where other companies want to come along and join.
Well, and it's exciting to see, you probably mentioned it, that companies, it's not probably like it was 20, 15 years ago. Like companies now are coming to you. So you're really going from like this, bringing the fair trade movement into the US to really just becoming the standard out there. And so a lot of companies are going to continue to come back to you, are going to continue to ask you to help them. And it must be very exciting to be part of that change. And of course, I'm very proud that I have the honor to speaking with you today. And I'm sure that a lot of people and companies out there will reach out to you after the interview. And of course, as you finish your book, do you have any date to kind of finish, any
Oh yeah, we're early stages.
self-imposed
Yeah,
deadline?
we're very early stages. We just got our publishing deal with
Okay.
Public Affairs, and so we're just starting to write. And target publication is next spring, so spring of 24,
All right.
which will coincide with our 25th anniversary celebration.
Well, congratulations for that as well. And before we kind of leave you, I wanted to ask you a little bit, and changing gears to the lessons learned, right? I mean, you have tell us a lot of things, but if you consider, and I'll ask you this question, if you consider your current Paul Rice, Don Paul, what advice, and usually it's the other way around, right? It's like, what would your current self advise your older self? But let's switch that around. What would the younger Don Pablo $1 in Nicaragua advise the current Paul Rice? What would he say?
Always stay true to your values.
All right. All right, Paul, this is incredible. for people that are listening to us.
I'm gonna add on to that. You know, my younger self would be dismayed that I spend my time talking to, you know, Doug McMillan at Walmart and, you know, John Mackey at Whole Foods before he left. John really just retired, but that's a lot of the work that I do, working with CEOs of major companies and on their sustainability journey, being a thought partner to them, obviously providing services to their companies, but also being a resource and a thought partner to incredibly influential leaders in the American business community that are trying to figure out a way to overcome the historic trade-off between being profitable versus being sustainable. Right? I think the mentality in the old way was either I can optimize profits for shareholders or I can be responsible and sustainable, but I can't do both at the same time. And the smart business leader today, the emerging mindset is yes, you can be sustainable and support the success of the firm and be more competitive in the long term by caring about responsibility and sustainability and baking that into the business model. And so I think we're in, you know, the early stages of a 50-year transition in capitalism from, you know, greedy capitalism to conscious capitalism. And many of the leaders of that are people who have embraced fair trade and who I have access to. And so I get to hang out with and be a thought partner to some pretty incredible business leaders. And so, you know, my 20-year-old self would have said, "Oh no, stay away from the big boys. You're gonna lose your compass. You're gonna lose your moral compass." And you know, the reality is, the business leaders that I work with, they share our values. They share a desire for the world to be more sustainable. They share the desire for the kids of farmers and workers around the world to be able to stay in school. American business leaders don't want to burn up the planet. They, you know, they believe in growing numbers, not everyone, but more and more business leaders believe that business can and must be a force for good. And so I'm really proud that I get to bring my values to work every day, and I get to help other business leaders do the same. And so I think, you know, my 20-year-old self would be a little skeptical. And so I hear him all the time, you know, staying as a values-driven leader. And what I love is that, you know, I don't feel alone at all. Quite the contrary. I feel like this is becoming the new normal in the business community, where business leaders, you know, figure out a way to use their businesses for good.
Well, I cannot think of a better way to end this interview. I mean, that was incredibly thoughtful, and I completely agree with you. It's refreshing to hear that companies and people that you work with on a day in and day out basis are starting to change. Some of them are already there. Some of them are, as I guess, advanced when it comes to fair trade as you are and your organization is. So Paul, for anyone that's listening to us that actually want to learn more about you, want to learn more about Fair Trade USA, want to maybe go through the certification process, where can they connect? What can they do to get to know you and your organization better?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I would love to connect with any of your listeners who are interested in exploring fair trade. Our website is www.fairtradecertified.org. Fair Trade USA is the name of the organization. I'm on LinkedIn. Would be happy to connect with anyone, and you know, and be a source of support to businesses that are looking to bring greater sustainability into their supply chains.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure for anyone listening to this episode. If you like conversations like the one we just had with Paul, please don't forget to subscribe. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you.